Let's go. In the world of tailoring, a lot of emphasis is placed upon experience. So much credibility is given to those with experience. But what exactly is experience, and who are we referring to when talking about an experienced person? Let's look at the Oxford Dictionary for the definition of experience. Practical contact with and observation of facts or events. Let's break this down. So on one hand, we have practical contact with something. On the other hand, we have observation of facts or events. So considering this in a typical tailoring scenario, it goes like this. You're working on a project, you mess up. You get confused, and you figure out what the problem was. You remember it for the next time, and now you've gained experience. And as you get older, you're going to make many more mistakes and learn from them. But age and experience, or time and experience, don't necessarily translate into knowledge. Just doing something for a very long time doesn't mean you're going to master the subject. For most aspiring tailors, this should be encouraging because it means that you can accelerate your learning and your experience by choosing the right approach. Whether you're working with or without a mentor, as a team or an individual, in order to effectively improve your performance and to validate your experience, you must understand the importance of evaluation, as experience without it is a lesson not learned. So what's a good approach, you might ask? Before starting on a project, focus on a specific problem. This will lead you to the right questions. The right questions will allow you to make a set of assumptions, which you can then test and evaluate. The key with this approach, however, is to really understand the problem. We can define a problem as something like efficiency in time and materials, technical, aesthetic, complexity of all the steps. The list goes on. Now let's use this approach on an example that most of us are familiar with, the false forearm. With the false forearm, the desired result is to have a hollow forearm with the forearm seam positioned inwards. And so when we look at it from the side or from the front, the seam is not visible. On a piece of rectangle, it would look something like this. We have a hollow curve on the folded edge, and we have the seam positioned inwards. That's the desired result. The problem, however, is that a hollow seam doesn't stay hollow when folded back on itself. It turns into a straight line. Now, the right questions would be something like, why is the hollow seam not maintaining its shape? And what happens if we would try to force it into a curve? After careful examination, we notice that a tightness occurs when we try to push both ends forwards in order to create a curved shape. So we think that by releasing the tension, like let's say making some sort of a cut, we can allow both of these ends to move forward and thus create a hollow curve. Let's try that out. We make some cuts and we fold them back over themselves. When we do that, we see that the cuts open up, which is a sign that the tension is released. Now, the folded edge is also in a curved shape. Obviously, we can't make cuts into the fabric, so we think that stretching it out would be the solution, as it's the equivalent of creating length. So we go ahead and try that out on a piece of fabric. Now, we take our fabric and we stretch that out and see if we can get the same result as we did on the paper. Now, as we can see, our assumption is correct. We would now have to go ahead and try this out on a real sleeve and evaluate the results. Now, good evaluation creates more questions, such as, is this really the best way to achieve this effect? Would this work on every fabric? What happens if this goes through a dry cleaning phase or if it gets wet? Would it still maintain its shape? And depending on the problem you're trying to solve, you can think of 100 more questions. It's really important to not fall in love with your own assumptions and to really be ready to dismiss them. That's the key to good evaluation, pure objectiveness. Remember, experience is simply an evaluated event, which works best when the problem and the desired result are set before the testing begins. Don't just make stuff and expect the tailoring fairy to turn it into experience. And also, don't expect an experienced person to be a master of the subject. Before starting a project, have a clear goal. This allows you to track your thoughts and your results in a constructive way. Knowledge is nothing more than a deep understanding of a subject gained through evaluated experience, as experience on its own is not always the greatest teacher.